In this bonus episode, extra edition of the KC Sports Authority podcast, the Royals, the hottest team in MLB free agency right now, making a ton of moves this week. Two more this morning that we're going to jump into with Jack Johnson of Sports Radio 810 here in Kansas City and host of the Locked On Royals Network to dive into all these moves and what's potentially next for this Royals franchise.
It was good, y'all. It's your boy JD6 here. I'm with my man. Shout out to KC Sports Authority. Make sure y'all go check that podcast out, man.
You heard the man.
And welcome into the KC Sports Authority podcast on what has been an exciting day for Royals baseball fans, Chris. And we are honored to be joined by Mr. Jack Johnson of Sports Radio 810 here in Kansas City. You can find him at nights there on 810. He's all over the place. You've got ESPN, Kansas City radio spots, Royals Review, and of course, host of the Locked On Royals Network. Jack, how are you doing, man? This has got to be a fun day for you since you are paid to make content.
This is, I think, the offseason that every Royals fan, has been dreamed of, not only, going into this year, but back when they were winning. Even when the Royals were winning, they didn't spend any money. Like, I think, the first memory I have of good Royals baseball and them spending money was like, you think about the Shields trade or the Omar Infante deal. And I was like, all right, they're meaning that they feel like they can upgrade at those spots. But after that, you're left with, an Ian Kennedy signing on the back end, the Jason Hamill deal. And it was like, okay, they're still trying to make it happen. But even back then, they're coming off wins. They were competitive in those years. This is the first time in my lifetime I saw them have one of the worst seasons I ever witnessed, right? And I remember the fighting Ken Harveys back in 05 and all that. But they actually threw money at their problems, which I think everybody criticized John Sherman last year and JJ Picollo. They don't care enough. They want to lose. They want a shiny new stadium. I think they always kind of envisioned this as if we don't have a good evaluation year and we find out who is good and who is not, because that's the kicker here. They actually, with this evaluation year, it wasn't about, well, we need to see how many wins we can get. If they found a guy that couldn't fit, they were going to fill that hole, whether that be through free agency or trade. And I think not a lot of people believe that, but tip of my cap to them because they finally showed, hey, this is what we're about.
Did anybody have it on their list that the Royals would be the most active team in the MLB free agency up to this point? Now, I know obviously the Dodgers have done a lot with the Ohtani deal and the trade for Tyler Glasnow, that's wrapping up right now. But the Royals being the second or the most active team in free agency, going after all of their positions of need and doing it as soon as possible, I did not see that coming. I don't think any Royals fan really felt that coming. To me, and this kind of leads into where I want to start, is the Dayton Moore to JJ Picollo era has officially placed its stamp. Now, I think fans can sit, any fan that was sitting here thinking JJ is just similar to Dayton. Chris, we've already talked about in episodes in the past. This is by far moves that we would not have anticipated the typical Royals of the last 5, 6, 7 years to do. Is it official that JJ Picollo is here and this is now his team that he's building along with the help of John Sherman giving us some money to make these contracts happen?
Yeah, it's been official. I think it started with the Aroldis Chapman deal that led to Cole Reagans. I think that's the first real thing to me that signaled that's something that Dayton's never going to do. And then now that they're out of this evaluation year, which just sounded crazy going into it, but you know what? If it's leading into this, I can't be too critical of it to where they have a better idea of what they have. They're showing their true colors, and there may be the added motivation of trying to sway your vote for a new stadium. That's definitely part of it. But regardless of the reasoning and regardless of why they're doing this, they're bringing in players. There's a buzz around the Kansas City Royals, which hasn't been true since 2016, maybe 2017 before they all leave. It's just a good feeling to be a Royals fan, which is not something we've said in a long time, especially in December.
Yeah. Jack, I've seen you've been posting quite a bit the last few days, interacting with fans on Twitter, answering questions, all this and that. Let's just start with today's signings. All offseason, both of these guys, Hunter Renfroe and Michael Wacha, were names to look out for. Chris has been high on Hunter Renfroe for weeks and weeks and weeks. He's been at the top of his list. So he got his guy. Wacha's another guy that I thought was fairly realistic. Just let's start with both of those two. What can you tell us about each of them? What kind of impact they might have and, what those contracts look like?
Well, I agree with Christopher here on Hunter Renfroe simply because the part of the Royals got better in right field. Like that's what I think a lot of people are struggling to grasp. Like it was either Hunter Renfroe, Edward Olivares, or Drew Waters. Take your pick. Like, be my guest if you want to go and gamble on that again. But that's exactly back to the point of the evaluation year. JJ wanted to evaluate Olivares and Drew Waters. And what he came to the conclusion of is they're not suited to be an everyday right fielder right now. And what they did is went out there and got Hunter Renfroe, who, yeah, took a dip last year, but also keep this in mind. It's how they got him for that price. It was the value there. I mean, you go back to 21 and 22, we're talking about Renfroe as one of the best power bats in the American League. You know, when he was with Boston, I loved Hunter Renfroe there. He's got a tremendous arm. And I think the Royals looked at it and said, okay, we want some, excuse me, we want some pop for the middle of the lineup, but we also don't want to overspend on a Lourdes Gurriel. Maybe Tommy Pham was worth a lot more than we expected to. And what I looked at it as is, okay, if they wanted Wacha, which it apparently turned out to be, they couldn't overspend on Gurriel. And the other thing that I kind of identified in the offseason plan with the free agents available, there was no true high OBP corner outfield bat. Like Tommy Pham's not an OBP guy. Gurriel's not an OBP guy. Brantley is, but Brantley missed all of last year, and he's almost 37 or 38. I loved Brantley, but I was like, even then, he's not what I'm thinking he's going to be. Hunter Renfroe may not be very good. Hunter Renfroe may strike out a lot. He may be very Franmil Reyes-esque, but like even last year in a dip, he popped 20 home runs. It was nearly a league average hitter. I think his WRC plus was about 95, and he's projected to be over that this year. So you get him for $6.5 million a year. He's got a player option. You raise the floor. That's been the goal for the bullpen. That's been the goal for the rotation. And now the lineup. And they don't probably make that Wacha deal if they go out there and sign Lourdes Gurriel. And then Gurriel wants probably 3 or 4 years, and are you willing to give that to a guy that is over the age of 30? Renfroe's 31, I think a few years older. You get him for 1 year. He plays really well. He tests the market. He plays average, and he wants to stay here. All right. But the Royals will have that flexibility. And clearly now we know they're all right making moves that are about money, okay? If they need to cut bait with a guy that's making a lot of money, they may be willing to do that because now for the first time, it's not really that big of an issue to them. They are showing that it's win-now mode. I mean, if you don't believe it, you say, oh, this team sucks. They're only going to lose, 90 games now. Guess what? The Central sucks. If they sat on their hands and didn't do anything, you would be going, why didn't they do anything, right? So to me, this is what we've been wanting to see. And in Renfroe, it wasn't the sexiest move, but then we find out an hour later, it was kind of a signature move for trying to get Michael Wacha here.
So let's go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say it's a calculated risk. Like, again, it's a cheap bounce back. You add a professional hitter to the lineup, something this team does not have very many of. Like, we're giving Michel Garcia, who's been in his first year, a lot of praise for his approach as a young guy. The Massies, the Waters, the Isles, they don't have that level of approach that someone like a Hunter Renfroe does. So just that alone, I think, is huge for this team. And again, if he's great, you add a 20, 25 home run guy. If he's not, you're not paying him a lot of money, and it's not the end of the world. So, yeah, I'm with you 100%, Jack. I absolutely love adding Renfroe to right.
I also love the move too from the point of he's got some familiarity with Matty Q from their days in Tampa Bay. So now you get a guy in the clubhouse who knows a little bit about him, can bring some of that into the team. And again, that proven veteran leadership that we just didn't see a lot of last year. Most of that was, relied upon from Salvi, which of course, assuming he's still on the roster going into the season, he'll continue to do that. But now you get another veteran proven at bat that can come in and step in right away. But let's talk about this rotation for a second here. Obviously coming in the offseason, that was one of the biggest question marks, starting pitching. And that's been a question here for years. The college pitcher route has not really panned out. They haven't developed into what we need them to be. It was time for a change. It was time to go out and find pitchers and not just rely on draft them. So the Royals get things kicked off with Seth Lugo the other day, which, again, that was one I've looked at for several months now as a strong possibility. So I like that move a lot. Now you pair him with Michael Wacha. Both these guys a little bit older starting pitchers, but guys that have had proven success. What do you make of the Wacha signing, and where do you think he slides into this rotation?
Yeah, I mean, this was to me, if they didn't go after Stroman, they didn't go after Giolito, like he was above Lugo for me. And what I love about both these signings, I mean, these are two guys that are coming off really good years. Like the Royals saw him in San Diego, both in that one series. They faced Wacha, who took a no-hitter into the 8th inning, And then Lugo, I believe they also saw later on in that series. It was either game 1 or game 2 of that series. But what you did there with these guys is you went after guys one, what you're getting in them. And that was a huge issue for the rotation, is that you had Marsh, you had Lynch, you had Singer, and it was all well, maybe they pitch well, but if it goes wrong, it goes really, really wrong. And with Wacha and Lugo, if it goes wrong, they're still pitching pretty well. Like, I think they viewed Lyles last year as kind of that guy going in when they signed him. It was, if it goes wrong, he still gives us 5 to 6 innings, but it just really didn't turn out to be that way. But they also paid him to be a number 2, number 3, and not a number 5 like he is now. I think in how this roster shakes out, I always believed they were going to go give some relief for Cole Reagans. Like, I don't see Cole Reagans being this guy they pegged as the 200 inning guy, go get 200 Ks. Like, he's never done that before at the big league level. And you're dumb to go out there and say a guy who's had 2 Tommy John surgeries, he's our workhorse, right? He can be by the end of the year. Like, I'm all hoping that Cole Reagans is an all-star. He'll get Cy Young votes and stuff like that. But the reality is he might regress a little bit because he was so friggin' good for the time he was in Kansas City. So you get Wacha, you get Lugo to take that relief off him. Like, if I had to put money down, I think Wacha starts opening day, because Wacha is a guy that last year had the better numbers than Lugo. I think he'll probably have a better year than Lugo. But this now gives you that flexibility of putting Lugo or Reagans as your 3, and get this, Brady Singer as your 4. Who would have thought that was possible going into this year? And even with Brady Singer, like, I've been critical of him. I know a lot of people have. He had a very weird offseason last year, right? He had the WBC. He goes and gets rocked against Team Mexico, never pitches again. So he leaves surprise, goes to the WBC, throws one time, comes back, and then starts like a game or two. Then he has to start on like game 3 or 4 of the season against Toronto. He's all out of whack at that point. And then he starts struggling. Like, I think a lot of people don't understand, if you get a full off season, workout, spring training, bullpen sessions, it really sets you up to have a great season. And I think the Royals know that. But now is where you're not counting on Brady Singer to be a 1 or a 2. He's a 4. That takes so much pressure off of a guy like him. And I'll go one step further. This takes immense pressure off Jordan Lyles if you so choose to keep him there. I know it's not a very sexy pick for the number 5 spot, but like, I don't see Jordan Lyles being as bad as he was last year. And even if he does not pitch well, he's the number 5 guy. At that point, you can move on, put Lynch or Bubic in that spot, or Alec Marsh. They've got more reliable guys in this rotation. I think even with Michael Wacha and Seth Lugo, they're not going to win any Cy Youngs. They're probably not going to be all-stars. But if they're consistent enough, they're reliable enough, think back to like Irvin Santana in 2013. Wasn't this big, sexy move, but it was a damn good one. Think like Jeremy Guthrie in 14. Think Jason Vargas in 17. These were guys that anchored the rotation. They weren't the 200 innings James Shields guys, but they round out your rotation. And for rotation, that was just throwing darts against the board. Who can go give us 5? Who can go give us 6? This stabilizes it. And that alone can make this team right now probably a 20 to 25 win improvement, which in the grand scheme of things is huge.
Especially in this AL Central, as you've alluded to and many others have. The AL Central is not good. It might be one of the worst, if not the worst division in baseball right now. And nobody in the division is really getting better right now, except for the Royals in the grand scheme of things. So, yeah, I love this move. I think for me, last year, I think going into the 2023 season, it felt like the Royals were putting all of the pressure onto Brady Singer after a pretty solid 2022 year to be the guy. And I think coming into that year, it was basically, if Singer doesn't have a good year, the rest of the rotation, is going to struggle. And of course, that was the case. He struggled. The rest of the rotation struggled. Now, just like you said, you take all the pressure off him. You get a guy like Cole Reagans, who could have, with the way he finished the year, could have come into the 2024 season as that headline guy with all of the pressure. Now you don't have that on him. You've got 3 proven veterans in that starting rotation that can take that pressure off, can take the mound every 5 days and do what they need to do so that Singer and Reagans can continue to get back to what their strengths are in pitch. So I love this rotation now. Is it one of the top end rotations? Probably not, but this is one of the better Royals rotations we've seen in several years now that can certainly compete, especially with some of the additions to the bullpen. I don't even know where to go next after that. We got a good rotation now, but what's next?
Yeah, Jack, I was going to also ask you real quick before we move on to
Yeah.
the next. Like, with the rotation, like, do you start Lyles in the 5, or do you give Lynch a shot? Because he's getting a lot of buzz right now, and you already have your top 4 are locked in. And I know Lyles being paid what he is maybe guarantees him a spot, but do you take a risk in Lynch in April, or do you wait for June or something like that?
Yeah, I think it really, really comes down to spring training for me. I know spring training is something you don't usually buy too much stock into, but I will if it's for a guy battling for a spot, because that does mean something. I don't get caught up if Bobby Witt Jr. struggles in spring training. We know he's got the shortstop spot. But for that 5 spot, like let's say Lynch goes out there and deals and absolutely goes out there and wins the job, then the Royals will have their hand forced a little bit. Okay, you got to put him in this rotation. Then you could maybe slide Lyles into the bullpen, because until they prove me wrong, I just can't see them eating Lyles' money right now.
Right.
Like, I think they signed him to this deal because they thought in this upcoming season, like, hey, he may not be the best, but if he gives you what Jordan Lyles did for Baltimore in 2022, a 4.7 ERA, he gets 170, 180 innings. Like, nobody enjoys going and seeing him pitch, but that's not collapsing. And I think for Daniel Lynch, what concerns them about him is he's never been healthy. Okay, his stuff really took a step back last year. He found better command. Strikeout wasn't there. Velo was down. And at that point, why am I even giving him a start if he's throwing 91, 92 and can't get the swing and miss, and he doesn't have pinpoint location? That's where I thought, with Lynch, things can really spiral. Like Lyles, things spiral a lot. Doesn't look good. But I think the Royals could go into opening day saying, hey, he's the 5, but then have this short leash. Like if it's Lyles 2.0 again, going back to last year, cut bait, man. Now you've got your answer, and you've got a couple guys that could replace him. Lynch, Bubic when he's healthy, Alec Marsh. Then you go forward from there. But let's say, Alec or Jordan Lyles, can you remember that stretch he had? I think it was July or August. Like, he was serviceable. He was okay. He wasn't imploding. Like, if you can get that, even for a small amount of time, it would be a good move, because at this point, it's like, if he's bad, he's a free agent next year. Now he can eat the money. I think they were so hesitant last year because he was still owed 8.5 in the following year. So to me, if Lyles is the 5 and returns to his usual form and not implode like last year, it's not a bad 5. And I think right now at this point, I'm willing to take that over the major risk you have in Daniel Lynch. And if Daniel Lynch pitches well, then I want him in the 5. If he pitches his way onto the roster in spring training, I will take him over to Lynch, or him over Lyles, 9 times out of 10. In fact, 10 times out of 10. If March outduels him, I'm doing the same thing. But if neither of them show me they can take that spot, I'm just going to pencil in Lyles as the 5 for now.
Yeah, it gives us plenty of options. But I guess the question I was going to lead us into next, obviously with these additions this week, there's some corresponding moves that are still going to need to be made. At least 3 spots need to open up. But before we get into what they do on the back end of this, are there any other guys free agency wise that you think the Royals should still target or could still be targeting, considering they've already given out about $47 million in contracts so far, $105 million total across all of them across the years, but $47 million into the payroll this year? Any other moves you feel likely to happen from a signing standpoint first before those corresponding moves happen?
Well, we knew that yesterday in the press conference, JJ Picollo basically mentioned, hey, we're not done. We feel like we need a significant move. That ended up being Michael Wacha. They wanted to add a corner outfield bat, a bat to the lineup. That was Hunter Renfroe. But the third thing he said was they still want to add to the bullpen. And that I love, because they could have stopped right now and said, hey, you know what? Alec Marsh or Angel Zerpa is the next man in that bullpen. I really don't think they want to do that. I think they want to keep those guys as depth, but they want to add another reliable piece to that bullpen. And the name that keeps popping up in my mind over and over again because of the local ties is Ryan Stanek. Ryan Stanek is that huge power arm. He's actually coming off a year where he walked, the least amount, at least in walks per 9. He was, kind of found a little bit better command. Velo was down just a tick, but that could put him in your price range again. And I think the Royals, like having guys with local ties. Ryan Stanek has pitched in the postseason before. He's, over the course of his career, been fantastic. The stuff is lights out. But I also could see them saying, hey, you have Will Smith. He's your one lefty. We want another lefty in that bullpen. Matt Moore is absolutely in that wheelhouse. He was great last year for the Angels and for Miami. And I think he was also in Cleveland for like a second when they were picking up everybody off waivers. But like those two guys, they feel likely. Like if they're going to add to this bullpen, those would be 2 great options, because either one, You're getting lights out stuff from Ryan Stanek. I think you can always have an extra guy for that in the bullpen, or two in Matt Moore. Eat a lot of innings, left-handed guy, good control, not walking anybody. And both those guys will cost under $5 million. And if JJ says, hey, we still want to round up this bullpen, it's not a bad outlet to go to.
And
I would love the
Stanek
Matt Moore move. Yeah, both of those I like.
See, Stanek is a Blue Valley high for those that you don't know, and he's coming off. I was just pulling up because I knew he was dominant in Houston. Over 3 years, sub-3 ERA, over 173 innings pitched. You talked about the velo, has a splitter that just falls off. Like, even if he's not quite that anymore, still, like you said, a huge presence to go in that bullpen. And is familiar with Will Smith and some of the guys in the bullpen already, so that's always nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of seems to be a trend this offseason is familiarity with the signings. You know, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha right there. You've got the Ranger connections already. We see guys that are coming to this team that aren't just coming from nowhere. They've actually got a lot of connections and familiarity here. But so obviously with these moves that have been made, there's got to be some corresponding moves to find room on the 40-man, you know. So I had the 40-man pulled up and would love to get your guys' take. Obviously, one of them that hasn't happened yet, but will at some point, will be Kyle Wright going to the injured list. So that'll take up one spot. But Chris has been very adamant that it's going to be some of these outfield positions. We got to move on from, you know, we just got an abundance of them, especially with the Hunter Renfroe edition. Now, even though we have an abundance, not any of them are particularly, you know, stand out as far as the rest of the league is, you know, desiring to come get. But you got Edward Olivares, Melendez as the two guys that probably pop up the most. Nick Prado, of course, even a Drew Waters. What do you think are some of the realistic moves we'll see, whether it's a trade or potential DFA?
You know, it's so funny because every name or every time this gets brought up, you know, trades wise, everybody's like jumping off the MJ Melendez bandwagon. And like, maybe I've just always been a big MJ guy, but like, I actually think he's going to have a pretty good year. You even go to Fangraphs and what they project him to be, an above average hitter. A walk rate, you know, somewhere around 12, 13%. Like, that can be very valuable to this team. So for those that are talking about trade, you know, locations and who to bring up, like, I just don't want to put MJ Melendez in that category, especially not now. Like, to subtract now and then go get another outfield bat, I don't really know if that makes sense. Like, MJ, I think, can be a very good piece for the middle of the lineup. If they are going to trade somebody, I'm looking more so like Drew Waters. I'm looking more so Edward Olivares, because it has told me this offseason that those are two guys they just don't really have a fit for. It's a logjam out there. Like, they're not going to move on from Nelson Velasquez. They just got him at great value for Jose Cuas, and he showed a lot more in just a month and a half than those two really did over the course of the entire season. So to me, it's like those are two options. Waters could be intriguing because he's got former first rounder tied to his name, and he was a number one number one prospect in a system in Atlanta, you know, for a while. So that can be attracting, and that can draw other teams. Olivares, there's not a ton because there's so many liabilities to his game. He's not a good fielder. He's not a good base runner. But to quote old beat reporter for the Royals, Alec Lewis, he's very hitterish, right? He actually does have somewhat of a decent bat that's around league average. I think somebody could use that as a platoon bat, and you could flip him for maybe a roster crunch guy, you know, a pitcher that's on the 40-man roster, but they don't really have a spot from the 26-man. Like, that to me is a great option. I mean, who would have thought yesterday the Royals get two successful minor leaguers for Taylor Clark? Like, this can happen in Major League Baseball as guys just, they're out of options. There's a roster crunch. They want depth in the bullpen. They want depth off the bench. You can explore those outlets. And to me, I do think a trade is coming with one of those guys. I don't think they're just going to outright Olivares. I don't think they're just going to outright Drew Waters. I think they're going to try to make a move, but then if it comes to the point where they can't, their hand will be forced. They're going to have to, unfortunately, DFA those guys, but it wouldn't shock me. Like, if you DFA Edward Olivares, he could clear waivers. Like, he could. Now, he could also say, I want to be a free agent. I don't want to go back to Omaha. I took the bus back and forth my entire career. I don't want to do it again. And I'd say, absolutely, you know, go on your way. But to me, I think there will be an option to explore at least those two options. You know, JJ loves Kyle Isbell. I thought in the beginning of the offseason, like, that would be an outlet. If Kyle Isbell hits marginally well, that's a very good defensive center fielder you can have that can be a decent bat at the bottom of your lineup.
Yeah, that's what I've always said too, is Isbell is like the perfect 9-hole hitter as long as he's playing good defense and the rest of the lineup looks okay. And people are forgetting about Hampson too, that they brought in for $2 million, who can play a little second, who can play a little center. So like, you do have those two spots. And I think if you're going into the season with MJ, Isbell, Hampson platoon, Renfroe, and then Velasquez as your DH, like I think you're feeling pretty good about that outfield. So it does open up. Like Waters, I think is always going to strike out too much. Olivares, I don't know if he's ever going to hit right-handed pitching and play good enough defense to be an everyday guy. So those two just don't have one area that makes you go like, we have to have this guy. That Jack, I know I've been like agreeing with your sentiment for 90% of this podcast, but like that's exactly the two guys that need to get rid of. I'm always big on Prado too, getting rid of him because I think he strikes out too much as well. He seems like a great guy, like the Rays would try to take and fix. Kind of fits their profile, but that's, I don't know how much demand there is for a first baseman that doesn't hit enough and strikes out a lot.
Yeah, Prado kind of seems like the odd guy out too in some of these situations.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about it too is, I had some people as well go, well, why don't we start Nick Prado at first base and Vinny Pasquantino DH? I'm like, what I keep going back to, I'm like, guys, the evaluation year was for that reason. Like they lost 106 games so that they could make moves like this. Like it's not like, oh, well, if he stays healthy, he might be good. That may be the case. The Royals are done doing that. They've done that now for 5 to 6 years of giving the benefit of the doubt. And if you can remember that season in review press conference, JJ said, and it was the best thing I think he said since becoming the GM of the Royals, he said, we have guys that can bounce back. We're not counting on that anymore. Like you just can't go into a year saying, well, if Drew Waters puts it together, if Nick Prado puts it together, guess what? When they're in a slump in June or July, your team's going to go on a 9 or 10 game losing streak because they are a premier spot. Waters in center, Prado at first. Like they're trying to round out this team and raise the floor so that when there is a slump, which there's going to be, it's a 162 game season and there's still holes to this team. But remember in April last year, Bobby's not hitting, Vinny's not hitting, MJ's not hitting. Who can you turn to? If it's a guy you are so counting on to become something, you're going to lose a lot of games. And that's what I think JJ was done with. It was what Sherman was done with. And that's why with guys like Prado, Waters, Olivares, they could become something. They may go thrive elsewhere. But if you want to win games now, it's about raising that floor and just banking on that. I mean, what's the point of an evaluation year if you just do the same thing at certain positions next year? Like you have to upgrade. They're getting an upgrade basically. Like I can count Vinny Pasquantino as an offseason acquisition. He missed basically the entire last year, and he may be the best pure hitter on this team. Like he is projected to have an OBP north of 360, a WRC plus north of 130. Like that would be one of the best offensive seasons we've seen from the Royals in a long time. If he stays healthy, he's my first baseman. At DH, I'd much rather gamble on Velasquez than Prado. For right field, I'd much rather have a high floor guy like Renfroe than Olivares. So that's why then they came down to, and that's a good thing about evaluation year. You lose as many games, listen, we're a long ways off. What do we need to improve on? Pitching, bullpen, add an outfield bat. And they did all three of those things, at least so far, and may not be done just yet.
So since they're not done yet, I guess another question I have as far as what could be coming down the pipeline soon. The one position, or I guess two positions you're still getting a little bit of talk on is Michel Garcia the best option at third? Is it best to move him to second, move Massey for something else and find us a third baseman? Or with the additions of Renfroe and some of the pitching staff now, and assuming Melendez stays and takes over left, is that infield with Massey at second and Garcia as your everyday third baseman good enough to compete with what we need out of each of those spots?
Yeah, the one thing with Michel, like I would say he is the one guy that's like one little fix, and we're talking about an all-star here. Like I really think he profiles so well. People were upset last year. It's like you can't have a guy hitting 6 home runs at third base. He trained all offseason as a shortstop. Like they made him switch to third base because he was performing so well in spring, so well in the Venezuelan Winter League, and then he just tears it in Omaha. And it was, okay, well, he's a shortstop, but we have Bobby Witt Jr. at shortstop. He's got to play elsewhere. They liked Michael Massey, and lo and behold, they had Hunter Dozier at third base. So it was like, okay, of those options, who are we moving out there? And it was Dozier. But Garcia, like, you can't just add 20 pounds midseason and expect to, carry on that trend. But what profiles about him so well, he hits the ball incredibly hard. That's a really good thing. He is not a strikeout guy. He is one of the best defensive third basemen in baseball. The one little tweak he needs to have, he's got to lift the ball. The minute he starts lifting the ball, you're talking about an American League Key Brian Hayes, which if you're not familiar with Key Brian Hayes, I know you guys are, but for people listening, like you could argue one of the best defensive and overall third baseman in the National League for the Pirates. I think that is a future for Michel Garcia. if he lifts the ball. If he never does, eventually you got to get to that point of, okay, maybe he's a second baseman. Because if he's a second baseman, then go either spend on a third baseman or maybe Caden Wallace becomes that guy. There are options there. But I'm just not willing to move on from him because I just have this pitting fear. He goes somewhere else. They tell him, hey, lift the ball. And you're looking at one of the best third basemen. I need to stop saying defensive third baseman. I'm talking one of the best third basemen in baseball if he just lifts the ball a little bit. Because if he does, you run into 15 home runs. And then you're elite defensively. You're not a super high OBP guy, but all things considered, I mean, they've got a gem here in Garcia. And even the last couple of years, like prospect guys and guys that follow with a game like that, follow prospects in minor leagues, draft picks, like they always had Garcia near the top. Like this kid is a stud. He's going to be a stud, but he weighs 145 pounds. Like he's so small. He bulks up a little bit. The tools are there, which is why right now, especially after all these moves, it's kind of, dare I say, win now mode. Like they're trying to go win a division right here. If you trade Garcia, who's the backup option, right? Are you going out there and getting somebody else? Are you rushing Caden Wallace? Or are you trying to make something fit there? Like if they traded Michel Garcia now, the opening day third baseman is Garrett Hampson, which would be a significant downgrade. So to me, I'm rolling with that left side of the infield because if you play your cards right, if you can somehow lock both those guys up, I mean, that's a left side of the infield a lot of teams dream of to have for even just like 3 years.
See, my fear with Garcia is like if the exact opposite, like what if he never does lift the ball? Now you're wasting having a superstar at shortstop with getting no power out of third, but more historically. So that's kind of where my fear is with Bobby. Like all the metrics look good. What could you get for Garcia? Because it is a shortstop middle infielder that has a good approach, that is a great defender, which has a lot more value in the middle infield than the third. I was big on getting a starter for Garcia, which I know not a lot of Royals fans, because most do share your sentiment there. But like now with the rotation, I do think you take another year to see if he does lift it. But like if someone's calling and has it looking for a shortstop and Garcia's who they want, depending on what you get in return, like I would at least take the call.
Yeah, he's definitely putting himself in a position to get more notice across the league as far as a player of interest. But I like keeping him. I think there's enough power across the rest of the diamond to potentially make up for the lack of power he might bring at third base, especially getting Vinny back, sliding Velasquez to DH and Renfroe out there in the outfield. So I think there's enough power to spread that out. But he gets on base a lot. He's effective. He looks like a fun pairing with Bobby. So I'm all for keeping him. But let's kind of wrap up there. A lot of stuff happened this week for Royals fans. And so, Jack, we thank you for joining us today. I'm sure you've got all sorts of things you could be doing today to prep for your own episodes for Locked On Royals. But where can all of the Royals fans find you with all the different things you're involved with?
Yeah, very easy to go follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's JOHNYJ_15. And always be sure to go subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're trying to, really increase some numbers. And over the last couple of days, certainly have gone up because the Royals are doing things. But yeah, easy to find me on both those platforms. Twitter is the best place to go get me. But even if you go to Twitter, it links right to the YouTube channel. So those are the two best ways to go out and reach out to me.
And again, guys, he's Jack Johnson. You can find him here locally in Kansas City on 810 Sports Radio. Always involved in a lot of stuff and doing a lot of great things with the Locked On Royals Network. They've been really taking off the last few months since he's joined. So go check them out. Those of you that are watching here, we, of course, are glad that you're checking us out. If you can, hit that subscribe button for us as well as we continue to grow. It's been a fun week, a lot of great sports content out there, so it gives us easy stuff to talk about. But, Jack, thanks again for joining us. Hopefully we can catch up with you again down the road here and talk some other signings and maybe get into, what the Royals season outlook looks as we get closer and closer to training camp. So thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, loved doing this. It was a blast and can't wait to come back on some point.
All right, guys. He's Chris Tenpenny. I'm Keegan Russell. You can find us on Spotify. You can watch us here on YouTube at KCSA Pod. Check us out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well at KCSA Pod. We got plenty more coming. All of you Jayhawk fans out there, go check out our KU Indiana preview, which is now up in addition to this bonus episode of the KC Sports Authority podcast. Until next time, guys, we'll see you later.